Welcome to the Literary Lounge, where we have honest conversations with authors about life, literature, and the spaces in between. Today, we are going to meet the famous author of We Used to Live Here, Marcus Kliewer, whose book has received critical acclaim from all over the world. He's a writer and a stop motion animator, and his debut novel, which started as a serialized short story on Reddit, has turned into a global phenomenon, with Netflix already in the works to build a movie on the book. But there's so much more that's left unanswered in the book when I read it, and so much that we now have an entire Reddit forum called Old House Archives dedicated to figuring out theories from the book. So you can only imagine how excited I am to be talking to the man behind the horror fiction that left me sleepless literally for days. So first of all, thank you so much, Marcus, for joining me for this discussion. I'm thrilled to be talking to you about it finally. How are you doing these days, especially after the success of your debut novel? And what are you currently reading?
I'm doing great, and thanks for having me. Yeah, I've been just taking it day by day. It's been pretty crazy seeing the reaction, seeing it pick up on social media, seeing the theories form. And yeah, I'm currently reading Incidents Around the House by Josh Mallerman, which is a super creepy book that released shortly after mine, I believe. And really enjoying that, kind of taking a slow vacation from writing for a couple weeks here.
Wow, that sounds interesting. I haven't heard of the book yet, but I would like to pick the book that you just mentioned, Incidents Around the House, I guess.
Yeah,
Um,
he's the author of Bird Box and a few other really big novels as well. So
oh, awesome.
yeah.
Sounds great. I would like to pick it up because, so funnily enough, We Used to Live Here was my second horror fiction that I read. The first that I read was Carrie, which did not spook me out as much as this one did. I literally couldn't sleep for days. I mean, and when I was reading the book, I made sure that I had all the lights on because I was reading at night, and I did not ask. I asked people in my room to be there and not leave me alone because I was so spooked out. So absolutely wonderful that experience was, and I would love to explore more such books, of course.
Cool. Cool.
But before we move into the discussion and dive deep into the, of course, intricacies of this horror fiction, I'd love to know more about the story behind the novel. I happen to read a lot of, I happen to read every snippet of the book before I dive into the main book. And I saw that it was started as a short story, which is what won the Scariest Story of 2021 award also on the NoSleep forum, right? And so how did it all pan out, and where did your story start? What was the idea behind it? And how did it turn into a novel that we have in our hands today?
Yeah, so it's a story I've actually adapted three times now. So the first version I wrote was a one-part story on Reddit that was much darker than any of the following versions. And I was working on that forum, just writing kind of series and short stories, and some people reached out to me, um, basically saying, "Oh, hey, we sold a story to Netflix last July, and we really like the stories you're writing. Would you be interested in talking?" So, the first thing I think is this has to be a scam or something like that. But, I kind of did my due diligence and ended up meeting with them, and it definitely wasn't a scam because I'm sitting here right now. So, yeah, they basically took, I'd always wanted to expand my first version of We Used to Live Here, either in a sequel or kind of redo it into a longer piece because it was so popular and it was kind of just a one-off at the time. And so um ended up taking that story, expanding it into a four-part series on Reddit, and then that's how it got picked up by Netflix, and shortly after that a big publisher. So everything happened really quickly. It was like a very strange, very whiplash kind of experience. And yeah, and now novel deal and everything like that just kind of spawned out of Reddit and that fandom. So
Wow, that sounds absolutely amazing. So the novel came after the movie got picked up, or I mean, the story got picked up for a movie, or did it happen all together?
it was about a week after Netflix bought the screen rights to the short story that my agents who I'd also picked up through the people that reached out to me basically took it out to all the publishing houses as the Reddit short story. And they were like, we're going to adapt this into a novel, completely separate from the whole Netflix deal. But obviously, they use that to leverage it and be like, hey, look at this cool movie that's attached. And yeah, so about a week within like 2 weeks, my life just completely transformed. Like I'd never made money off of that type of writing before or anything like that. So it's just, completely surreal experience.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. So, did you already have like an idea in mind how you would expand your short story into a whole novel, or did you have to like go back to the drawing board again and then think about what would be the larger picture?
A bit of both. So my agent actually got me to write up kind of a one page before we took it out to the publishing house to explain how I would expand it. And then that completely changed during the actual process. So it was like, it's one thing to think about expanding it, it's a whole other thing to actually go in and do it. So yeah, it was kind of a bit of both. Like I had some ideas and then other things just happened organically. But there's about 4 versions of this book on the cutting room floor. Like I think I have a document of deleted scenes that's like over 60,000 words long, or like it's almost as long as the novel itself. Of things that I kept cutting out, putting back in, being like, oh, is this too much? Is this not enough? So some of that material may appear in future things. We'll see.
I would love to read it. Okay, and what was the reaction of your Reddit fans once they heard that your short story is finally getting turned into a novel?
Yeah, that was huge. Like I'm so grateful to that community and that fandom, and they were obviously stoked. If anything, they're a little bummed because I haven't been posting on Reddit as much because I've been so busy with the novels, but I really want to start doing that again in the future. Um, but yeah, it was crazy because like I'd had some of these fans for starting that year, and I'd had people that, would be constantly messaging me, when's the next part coming out? When's the next part coming out? And then um yeah, it's very cool and lots of support from that community. So
Wow, absolutely, absolutely wonderful. And now I'd like to begin with the many cues and clues and loopholes that we have tied into the novel. It's more like solving a puzzle than reading a book, right? The more you read, the deeper you get into the mystery, and the more entangled it gets somehow. So my question here is twofold. One, the book has documentation from random articles, videos, and clips that help us put it all together, right? So where did the idea to write a book in that format come from? Or did it happen like after you've had the story in place? And did you know the ending of the book when you started writing it?
yeah, so the first thing with the documents, I was inspired by a few books. So one is House of Leaves, which you may have heard of, reference to this book, or I don't know if you've read it. And that book is basically like take the weird documents of this book and just make an entire book of that. Like it's very, if you think We Used to Live Here is weird, it's like take that and times it by 10. It's a brilliant book. It's an amazing, House of Leaves, one of my favorite books ever written. And I owe so much to it. And so that was a huge inspiration. And then another book by an author named Nick Cutter called The Troop. And he used documents in a really effective way to kind of expand the story and show perspectives that you weren't able to see otherwise. And I thought that was really interesting. And so I think I kind of split the difference between the weirdness and the narrative expansion kind of use of it. And some of it's just kind of weird and it's not really sure how it connects, and it'll probably connect in a future thing. And then other ones are obviously very directly related to what's happening. And I just really like that as a narrative technique and as a way to kind of hide cryptic symbols and to kind of make people want to know more. As frustrating as it can be to not have the answers, it definitely makes people think about it more and want to figure out what's going on. And then the second part of the question in regards to the ending, I'd pretty much known since I cracked the Reddit 4-part series, but even the initial one-parter, which I think if you dig, you can find some YouTube narrators that did a version of it. I don't know if I can recommend it. It's quite a bit darker than both other versions, but the ending has always been relatively similar. I don't want to spoil anything. And if you've read the Reddit version, the ending between that and the novel is very similar, with some key differences. But yeah, I've always had kind of that in mind for this ending. Yeah.
Wow, I haven't read the Reddit version yet, but now that you're talking about it, I think I need to go back and dig that version as well, because this had me hooked so bad. So I always wondered that that version would be a smaller version of the entire novel and not something different. But if it does have like key differences, then I think I should go back to it. Maybe pick something out from that. Maybe I'll get some answers that I did not get here, and that might help in some way.
Right, right.
One more question, with in line with my previous question, would be on the open-endedness of the book, right? It leaves so many questions unanswered. You literally have like 100 theories that you could form from the ending, and it still would leave you hungry for more. So first, do you enjoy books and movies that leave you wanting for more, and that have an end that's really not an end? And second, were you satisfied yourself with the ending? And I think it pretty much answers your previous answer pretty much answers the second part of my question, because you already mentioned that all the Reddit versions have similar ending, but I would still love to know what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, I don't know if satisfied would be the right word, because I'm inherently a fan of unsatisfying endings. I've always been a fan of even when I'm frustrated by them, there's something like, especially with horror, that really grabs me with that. Like I think to a movie like Blair Witch Project. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but the very famous final shot in that movie that really just doesn't answer anything, but it's so provocative and so unsettling that it's become like ingrained in pop culture, the ending of that movie, and you never find out really what happened. And to me, that's always scarier. It might not be a better story. In fact, usually if you explain what happens, it's almost always going to be a better, more satisfying story in a conventional sense. But very rarely is it scarier, and very rarely will it stick in the reader's mind the same way. But by that same token, I very much view this as, I don't want to confirm anything one way or the other, but it certainly seems like there's more to be told here, whether that's in a sequel down the road or in a book that is in the same universe. There's still answers to these questions that I want to explore, while still maintaining some level of ambiguity, because I think the fear of the unknown is really what freaks me out as a reader, as much as it frustrates as well. But yeah. And what was the
I,
other part of the question?
I think that was it. And do you like open-endedness, open-ended literature or works yourself?
Yeah, I think I do. I think it can be a crutch. And I think, to be frank, in some ways it was a crutch, because there was like things that I wanted to answer, and there's things that I do have answers for, that there were versions of this book that did explain a lot more. And I kept cutting back and I kept saving things, because I was like, I'd rather live in that air of unknown than make something concrete and make it take away from the horror of it. So I guess it's kind of a bit of both in a way. Yeah.
Wow, that that is I haven't watched the movie that you mentioned, the Blair Witch Project, I guess. But now that you've mentioned it, again, adding it to my recommended watch list, and I'm going to watch it now and see what it has in store for me. But of course, I agree with you on the fact that movies and shows and books that leave readers and people who watch movies on an open-ended note, they are a lot more scarier, and they're a lot more intriguing. I would say even Inception, for that matter, I think is famous because it leaves the viewers on an open-ended note, right? Because you never know what happens, whether it was a dream or it wasn't. And I think that is very true. The horror fiction work enhances a lot more if there is an open-ended end to it, that there's an end but it isn't really an end. And when I was reading your book, I could find some glimpses of a sequel in some ways, that there might be a different book, of course not maybe an extension to the story, but maybe an extension to the house. It might have something else that might come up, because of course there's another forum also called Old House Archives. I know you cannot commit to anything at this point in time, but I would really hope that we get to read more from you on that house.
Yeah, I think just in general too, like the frustration that a lot of people have is I completely empathize with it, but I'm also, it's like if you try to make everybody happy, then you're gonna not make everyone happy. So it's kind of striking that balance, I guess. But
Yeah. But I think people love your book. I've seen so many people like talking about your book actively. Even when I started putting up stories, people kept messaging me, telling me that, I've read this book also, and you are not going to believe the end that is in line. What you're going to read next is going to spook you bad. But I was like, bro, don't give me spoilers at this point in time. I would like to see
yeah,
for myself what happens. But yes, I can see that a lot of people have already read the book and they're really, really excited to see what's coming next from you.
yeah, yeah.
So, after finishing the novel, I hopped onto the Reddit forum that you had also shared on your Instagram channel called the Old House Archives to look for more, to find some answers. But honestly, it felt like stepping into another twisted world where there were a million other theories. Um, but what was your thought behind opening a forum dedicated to the book? Do you at some point plan on spilling out some secrets yourself on the forum, or give out some answers to your readers?
I guess I'll be coy in the sense of maintaining some illusion of reality, because it gets to a point now where even with the Reddit stories, people would kind of post their theories underneath the story, and then some people would start playing into it as if it was real as well. And people I don't even know. And I think existing in that space, there's a lot of energy in that, and it kind of adds to the mystique of it, and it adds to the did this actually happen? Is this based on something real? Because I am drawing from quote unquote, urban legends, paranormal activity kind of stuff. And I think it's just a lot of fun living in that space. And it's a tradition that started for me on Reddit, because the entire subreddit is kind of everyone's pretending the stories are real, even if they're not. And I wanted to sort of bring that spirit into my book. Um, and it's also just so fun seeing people's theories, seeing people come up with better theories than what I had ever planned, like just coming up with, they're saying something that I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't even think of that. And like, I can kind of go back and maybe retcon it to make it work. But that's a lot of fun as well. Like I can't say because it'll spoil future things, but I've seen theories that are just like so much better than anything I was thinking. I'm like, oh my goodness, I should rework what I was planning here, because this is yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
I can only imagine, and especially if this book is your baby. So when you see people talking about it so much on Reddit, on Instagram, everywhere, people talking about the theories, I can only imagine the kind of joy it would give you, and the kind of absolute thrill you would feel when reading such theories. So kudos to you for writing such an amazing novel that's keeping the conversation going. People are still talking about it, and they're thinking about what would happen next, actually.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the art of writing horror fiction. Since this is your debut novel and a fantastic one at that, what, according to you, was the most challenging aspect of writing horror? And have you ever had a personal experience that spooked you out personally? Or have you come across a house even remotely similar to the one that you've mentioned in the book?
Yeah, I think for horror, the hardest thing is just knowing what is scary and what is going to creep people out and what is not. Which again, it's like comedy, that's objective. Like there's some people that will find something terrifying and other people won't even be fazed by it. Um, and I think for me, kind of finding that space between creepy and it's if you try to make something too creepy, it comes off as if you're trying to scare the audience. And then I feel like people shut down. Like an example I would use would be like, oh, you go up a winding driveway and there's gnarled trees and there's bats with red eyes and the house has spikes. It just becomes like a hat on top of a hat on top of a hat. And it becomes almost a parody. Whereas more and more I'm learning if you just take one little thing and make it off, like one of my favorite, I kind of referenced this line slash ripped it off, but one of my favorite lines in a book is from Cormac McCarthy, and it's the book The Road. And it's this father and son traversing a post-apocalyptic landscape, and they're scavenging for food, and they come across this house. And the line simply says the windows were oddly intact. And you just kind of sit with that line, and they go into the house, and it kind of you realize why those windows are intact slowly. And so kind of taking one little pebble and putting it in somebody's shoe and then letting them walk around with that as they're reading and then kind of pull the rug out is really what I try to do. And then as far as a house that inspired it, it was actually very much inspired by a real thing that happened in my childhood, which was my parents and I and my siblings were driving past an old house that my mom and dad used to own. And the current owner was out there washing his car. I must have been like 8. Uh, I'm not sure my exact age. I was quite young. And the owner kind of comes over because he sees this family staring at his house. And then my dad explains, like, oh, my wife and I used to own this house. And, these are my kids, kind of. And, they made some small talk about the house, about the neighborhood. And we're about to leave, we're about to drive away. And then the current owner says, oh, did you ever notice anything weird about this house, to my dad? And then he went in to explain, he saw lights turning on and off. His wife would see like an old woman walking around, classic, like their dog would sort of stare at things, kind of like the dog in the book. And that really stuck with me as a child. Not so much the ghost stories themselves, but it was the way he had asked, which, if you'll recall, there's a similar moment in the book where Thomas asks Eve, and he seemed embarrassed to be asking about it, and he seemed like he was looking more for external validation from somebody else to be like, am I the only one experiencing this, or did somebody else who lived here also experience it? And that really creeped me out as a kid because it seemed more credible. He definitely believed whatever had happened, whether it was real or not. He believed it had happened, and that stuck with me for a good 25 years until I wrote this novel. Yeah.
I can't even imagine what kind of horror you must have felt at that point in time. Was any of it real? Did your father just tell you that he had felt something similar?
So I think they downplayed it at the time because they could see that me and my siblings were creeped out. But he had actually found, when him and my mother moved in, he had found some like shrine thing under the basement stairs with all these cryptic symbols, and he like took it out, and he never told my mom about it because I think it was their first house, so he didn't want to, because they're both religious, right? So they didn't want to be like, oh my God, there's something demonic in this house. And then my mom would have horrible nightmares there. I remember them talking about that. But as far as paranormal things, they've never divulged anything. But funnily enough, we had actually gone back there again to a garage sale, and there was more people living there who also unprompted asked my dad. It was like in 2008. They thought the house was haunted by a little girl or something. So it was like, there's definitely something with this house.
Oh my God, that is super
Yeah.
spooky.
Yeah, I believe it's torn down now. I'm not sure though. I'll have to double check on that.
Hopefully. I
Yeah.
hope that happens.
Yeah, yeah.
So, do you yourself believe in horror stories?
Um, I don't I probably I've never experienced anything personally that I could say is completely unexplainable. And I don't want to discount anyone's experiences because people have things that feel very real to them. So I would say I personally haven't seen anything enough to say I believe, but I've heard stories from people that I know and that I respect and that I trust that I'm like, I don't know what happened, like I just whether that was some crazy one-off thing or whatever, but yeah. So I would say I don't personally believe, but I'm very open to being proven wrong.
Wow. That's I think a good approach.
Yeah.
Uh, okay, moving on to the book. If it's a fun question, and I'd like to know what you think about it. If you're given $1 million to spend the night in the old house in your book, what would you do?
$1 million. I would, because I know the lore of the house and I know behind the scenes the mechanisms of it, I'd probably take it because I would know more or less what to do and what not to do. But if I didn't know that, then I definitely wouldn't take it because, yeah, I think there's things that I have written down about the background lore of everything that is just much worse than anything that's been presented on screen as to how bad that house can get, whether it even is a house or whether it's a place or whether it's an entity or whether it's a hoax or whatever. But there's stories about it that there's no amount of money you could offer me to go into that house. I'll just put it that way. Yeah.
Oh my God, I would love to know those stories. I know it's probably gonna leave me spook for days or maybe months, but I would love to know those theories.
Yeah, I'll reveal them in the future. I'll put it that way. They're all top secret right now, but
Okay, okay. Hoping for something to come out soon.
yeah.
Now, there's a map right at the beginning of the book, and I want to know what significance, according to you, the map holds. Because when I read the book, honestly, I was confused about what this is, why it's here. And even after reaching the end of the book, I did find some clues to it, but there were parts of the map that I did not understand at all. And I did not understand like what exactly is happening here. So it maybe I need to read the book again, but what does this map particularly hold? What kind of significance does this map hold for you? And are there any clues that I have missed or have I not been able to figure out?
The So first I'll say the confusion is a very reasonable reaction, and I think it's what most people will have to that. Um, and I will say there are many clues buried into that and its connections as to what's going on with Eve and the neighborhood and the woods and all that. But so many of them won't be fully realized until future things or diving into it online because there's a websites connected to it and everything like that. It's all living, breathing, it's all evolving in the background right now. But funnily enough, the map itself wasn't in the early reader review copies. Instead, it was actually a document describing the map and talking about how it was placed in a museum in Utah. So I'm probably going to put out that document as well, which will provide a little more context or may just confuse people even more. But yeah, the confusion is intentional, and that's all I can really say without giving away too much. So I'm sorry, but
Okay, no problem. So there's a website in the making. I'm just getting hints of it.
yeah, I mean, there's the Reddit, and then there are websites mentioned in the book that may or may not actually exist online, that are constantly evolving according to my sources. So that's something to keep an eye on as well. A lot of this, it's like the reaction has been so much crazier than I expected. So we're kind of like scrambling to do some of this um, in response. But yeah, I'll just say
That
that
is so
much.
awesome. Oh my God. I need to go back to those websites now. I think I found some in okay. I need to go back to the book again to figure things out.
I'll just say it's all constantly evolving, so just keep an eye out and keep an eye out on that subreddit. And yeah, there will be lots of hidden content and stuff like that.
Definitely. Definitely. Keeping that in, as a note for myself. If there's one answer from the book that you'd like to answer, one secret that's hidden in the book but not explicitly mentioned, what would it be?
I
I know that you might not be able to answer it as well as I'd like, but whatever you can spill would be good enough for me.
I will say something that I thought was more clear, and that's that the final document is written by Charlie. I'll say that. So the very final document in the book, a lot of people seem to think it was written by Eve or written by some other character, but it is written by Charlie, the kind of like epilogue document about somebody looking for their partner was meant to be written by Charlie. So that's the one thing I'll give away. And then the other thing I'll say, which I think is pretty clear, is that something real happened to Eve. This wasn't a scenario of it all being a dream or it all being in her head. I've seen a few people kind of interpreting it that way, and I don't want to. Generally, I'm like, the viewer interprets how it is, but in this case, my intention was very much that something real happened to Eve, whether that's supernatural, whether that's whatever you want it to be, but it wasn't just in her head. It wasn't like um it wasn't a mental illness thing as some people have been interpreting it. So yeah, those are two things I would make not necessarily reveal, but just want to make more clear. Especially in the
Okay.
nature of open-endedness. Yeah.
I think I had guessed all of that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
nothing new for me there, but
Sorry.
hoping for more works from you so that I can get some answers. So I have patience enough to wait for whatever's coming next. Which leads me to my next question. With this novel turning into such a huge success, what is planned ahead? What are you working on your next novel? Should we expect a sequel to this book, if not in the same universe as you previously mentioned? What's going to come next from you?
Yeah, so right now I'm working on a novel called The Caretaker, which I'm hoping to have out next year sometime. And that I can say does take place in the same universe. It's not a direct sequel though, but there are many Easter eggs referencing it in We Used to Live Here. So there's some things that sense once this book is out. Um, but it's standalone. Like you could read We Used to Live Here on its own, you could read Caretaker first, and you could appreciate both entirely. Like you don't need to have the other. It's just little Easter eggs and background things. Yeah, and that one I'm really excited about. It's getting made into a movie with Sydney Sweeney attached to star, and yeah, really excited about that one. And it's also adapted from a short story that isn't public. Um, but same genre, horror, supernatural. Uh, yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Wow. So the caretaker is being turned into a movie already?
Yeah, yeah, the
Oh,
second
wow.
one. Yeah,
So
yeah,
you have two books that are getting turned into a movie, and the second is not yet out.
correct. Yeah,
Wow, that is phenomenal. Wow, congratulations on that. This is huge. Absolutely amazing.
thank you, thank you.
And I think with that, I think I would like to end this discussion. But before I let you go, I would like to get some horror recommendations from you. Which books have you read and loved that you'd like to recommend to your readers?
Sure. Just off the top of my head, especially in relation to We Used to Live Here, I would say House of Leaves is an obvious one. Um, if you like the weirdness of We Used to Live Here, this is going to be even weirder. But it's very much kind of weird house, liminal space, mind bending, ambiguity, all that kind of stuff. It's a brilliant book, and the ciphers in that book are there's ones that apparently people still haven't solved, and it's been out for many years. So it's like it's just on a whole nother level of that kind of hidden codes and online communities and all that. So hugely influential on me. We Used to Live Here wouldn't exist without that book. And yeah, Mark Z. Danielewski, House of Leaves. And then another one I just recently read is called A Short Stay in Hell, which is a very short book. It's like a 2-3 hour read. And if you like kind of liminal space, existential horror, it's really good. It's really touching, and it's a book that I could have read a 1,000-page version of it, but it's very short. And that's by Stephen E. Peck or L. Peck, one of the two. Brilliant, brilliant book. And I'm just zoning out. I'm in the middle of reading a book called Tender is the Flesh by Agustina
Basterica. Yeah. I read
Yeah,
it.
and
Yeah.
yeah, that's very disturbing, so trigger warning for sure, but just incredible writing and really interesting world building. So yeah, there's 3 off the top of my head, or 2.5 because I'm halfway through the last one, but I am enjoying it a lot so far. So
I get it. Tender is the Flesh is one of the top reads this year. I read it this year, and I also got a chance to interview the author. So, I mean, absolutely
oh,
phenomenal
cool.
writing.
Yeah, yeah, really, really good.
Oh my God. Thank you so much, Marcus. I think with that, we've come to an end of this discussion. Thank you so much for joining us today, for letting me and our audience live the story behind the book again, once more. And I'm certain that this conversation is going to reach a lot more readers, and they're going to make all thriller and horror fiction fans grab your debut novel and dive into the world of the old house. And thank you, fellow readers, for tuning into this conversation. If you haven't read We Used to Live Here yet, go get it at a bookstore near you. If you aren't getting it in India, I'm sure you can find it on Kindle, because I know that the copies of this book are limited here. So you will definitely get it on Kindle. And I promise you, then and if you read this book, your minds will be blown away. It is an absolute phenomenon. This book is something that you need to read. Until then, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and follow us on Instagram. I'll add Marcus's Insta handle as well in the description below, so you guys can follow him as well. And if you like this discussion, give us a big fat thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next episode.